We are just about to start the panel on dying in New Mexico, options and choices. Want to give a big shout out to our sponsors who make this event possible. My company, A Good Goodbye, the Albuquerque Center for Spiritual Living, Bosque Trails Hospice, End of Life Options New Mexico, the First Unitarian Church, French Funerals and Cremations, Keeper, which is handling the Zoom, and Passages International, local providers internationally of green burial and cremation products.
So the people that I've asked to be here to share their choices, to share their profession, are actually my teachers. I talked about inspiration and expiration. These are the people who've inspired me by the way they form their professional practice. We're going to start with Jane Westbrook, and I'm going to do something to really encourage you to take part in this. I'm going to pass out all of their biographies and information about rites of passage from Dr. Lynn Nauman, and High Desert Hospice from Katie Martin. And so just pass it around and take a sheet, because this is really an invitation for you to come to know these individuals and the choices that they've made. It's quite an astounding story, and I'm going to stop there. So I'm going to just quietly sneak down. Jane Westbrook is going to begin. She's an extraordinary teacher. Folks call her Sensei because she has been a guide for many people in Bernalillo County. There are probably 350 plus students who have taken her 8-week course in end-of-life planning. It's transformative. Now, because I'm a professor, I'm going to give you signposts on this journey that I want you to actually hold on to, because not that you're going to have a quiz, but I want you to listen with an inquiring spirit. So here are the signposts. Number 1 is mind shift. Number 2 is palliative. 3 is VSED. 4 is made. You're not going to know what these are now, but hopefully after these heroic people speak, you will know. And profound for how our representatives supported us for choice in New Mexico. I want you to remember this name, Elizabeth Whitefield. Palliative, VSED, made, and the final is hospice. Some of you might know that hospice comes from an old word. It started to be used around 1820 by monks in the high Alps who had a secure refuge for strangers and travelers. Hospice we have at the very end because it really establishes in a clear way home. Hospice is grounded on a really ancient idea of hospitality, the relationship between strangers and guests and hosts. We're all a part of this community, and this is that moment where we're actually practicing to make an ascent, not the high Alps, might be quite flat, but the high desert. So thank you so much. First, we have Jane Westbrook, educator, guide. Take it away, Jane. I'm gonna, just so you know, sorry, I'll stand up at 20 minutes because the point here is you're all going to ask those questions you've been too frightened to ask. How come you can whisper them in my ear? So I'll stand up when it's 20 minutes. When you see me standing, you know you're at the end. And then you get to ask questions of each other and answer questions from our folks gathered.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming in and listening to this and taking another opportunity to learn. I've been blown away today by the number of people that have shown up for this event. And I do volunteer work with End of Life Options in New Mexico. I do a lot of tabling with them. And we were excited about this particular event because everybody knows what they're talking about when they come in. They're not coming in to talk to the Medicaid advisor or get their blood pressure checked or anything else. We're real clear about what we're talking about here today. Death is not a dirty word. And before I die. And so thank you all for showing up for this. And I hope it's just for some of you, it's maybe the journey that you've been on for a while, and others, it may be the beginning of it. There's an incredible amount of information in this building today. I want to tell y'all a little bit about where I am today and how I got here. While we're talking about dying in New Mexico, I look at it with a little bit broader scope, actually a pretty broad scope, a pretty broad brush, which is what I paint with all the time. And I created, 4 years ago, I created a class with Bernalillo County where I teach 8 weeks about end-of-life planning and end-of-life empowerment. I have taught it to over 300 people, between 300 and 400 people. It is free to seniors, and there's a flyer out in front, and you can talk to me after this, and we can talk about it. But I want to tell you how I came to talk about this, because it's all of the things. I'm not going to talk so much about the details of dying in New Mexico as the journey to dying in New Mexico. And this class that I created has 8 specific topics. One topic is, I call it Home Sweet Home, Aging and Dying in New Mexico. And we talk a lot about safety in our homes, and is it a place we can stay as we age? It's kind of an opening to talking about the journey to death, to the exit ramp, whatever it is however we're gonna get there. And most of us are still up on the freeway. We're not on an exit ramp yet. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that I meet, because I also do advocacy work and doula work, that I meet a lot of people when they're on, you know that runaway truck ramp that you see on the freeway, where you have suddenly out of control and you're running on this runaway ramp. That's what I try to prevent, is for people to have these conversations early enough, often enough, and deeply enough that maybe they can avoid the runaway truck ramp, that they can have perhaps a nice, clean, gentle exit ramp. But everything that I taught, that I teach in this class, I'm just gonna kind of go through them. The first part of that is aging in place, and I'm a certified aging in place specialist, which when I started doing this work, and made the proposal to Bernalillo County, I realized that I'd done every piece of this in some way, that I had become an aging in place specialist with the Home Builders Association. And so I can do home assessments, I can do home evaluations, I can help people walk through that and make it safe, or help them navigate to another place to live. So that's part of what I do, but that's where it came from, is that I was watching so many people not knowing what to do, even to make their home safe. In my class, I've had a few people, when they've taken this first week, they've gone out and they've sold their house. Sorry, it's a 2-story house with crazy stairs and a dangerous living situation. Then the next part that I cover is navigating the medical system, which is it's like having stairs in your living room. It can be a crazy situation right now. We talk about that so that people understand what their rights are, that they understand, that they begin to hone the ability to make choices, to say no, or not yet. I'll get back to you. I don't have to do that right now. Let me talk to my family and friends about that. And claiming your power back in the navigating the medical system. I have advocated, it's one of my absolute favorite things in the whole world, is to advocate with somebody in the medical system, to go in and let them claim their power back and say, wait a minute, just wait a minute, let's think about this, let's talk about this. Do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? So that's one of the things I teach, the Patient Bill of Rights, which comes with some obligations too. Then I go into a lot of the things that my friend Nancy, and well, actually all three are going to talk about, is the actual end-of-life choices and options, which are a lot more than people even know that they have. You know, they may not be talking about some of the things that I do because I run a little bit outside the edges. I tend to paint outside the edges. I got friends out here shaking their head and laughing. But we have lots of choices. They're going to talk about medical aid in dying. I talk in my classes about VSED, about voluntary stop eating, which I think we're going to hear some about today too. There's other options. I've got 3 clients right now. One of them is considering MAID, has the prescription in hand. One of them is going through her 3rd round of, oh my God, treatments, immunotherapy, radiation, I'm not sure what all. Another one is just on the exit ramp in a gentle way. All 3 of those are really valid, wonderful choices depending on the person. We talk about that actually for about 2 weeks. We talk about the different options and choices that people can have. So keep those in mind as you're listening to these other things, because I talk about all of these things as part of the journey to dying in New Mexico, or living well in New Mexico. My business that I'm working with right now, I call it the art and practice of living well, aging well, and dying well. And so I cover all of those things. It's not just the exit ramp. We do advanced healthcare directives, and we don't just go through and check the boxes. We go through and we talk about why. We talk about our values. We talk about what we might want. Who do we want to speak for us if we can't speak in real depth? I mean, we talk about it in depth. I've watched people completely rewrite their documents when we get through really analyzing what our values are. We also talk about estate. I'm not an attorney, but we talk about estate plans. I worked for an attorney, and that's part of how I got here, is that I decided to educate myself after a couple of traumatic deaths in my family, out a guardianship in my family, and I said, I need to help people find a better way to do it than this. So that's what's covered in the classes that I teach. I went to work for an estate attorney, got a good education, did a lot of work for her, still do. The question I get all the time is, do I need a will or a trust? The last 3 people that I have referred to this attorney, they didn't need either. There was a simple way to do it. There are simpler ways to do it. It's not just about trusts and wills, okay? We talk about after-death plans, after-death options. We've got green burial in New Mexico. Do you know what all of the other options are like? How long can you keep somebody at home after they have died? What are your rights there? Can you do home funerals? We talk about all those kinds of things. The last piece that we talk about in the classes is to organize all this stuff, because the most common thing, or one of the most common things I get from people is, I don't want to leave a mess. That's why a lot of people, I think everybody's head went like this when I said, I don't want to leave a mess. I think it's probably the most common thing that people say. And so we go through an organizer, and there's 1,000 different organizers out there, everything from the Knox box to, what's the book, I'm Dead, Now What? I mean, if you Google that, there's 1,000 different organizers. But to look at those and say, what really works for me so that I really don't leave a mess? Everything from passwords to safety deposit keys to safety deposit agreements. So we cover just a whole bunch of things. And as people who have been to my class can attest, it's also a lot of fun, huh, Gloria? It's a good time, and you would be surprised to spend 16 hours talking about the dying in New Mexico, or dying in general, how much fun it can be and how much mind shift happens that we can now talk about death in an easier way. So that's what I bring to dying in New Mexico, is to educate and empower and enable people to talk about this in the best way they can with the most information that they can gather out of it. And I don't have all the answers in this class. I tell people right up front, I'm not going to give you all the answers. I may give you some, but I'm not going to give you all the answers. But I'm going to help you learn to ask better questions. So that's what I do, and that's part of my journey in the dying process in New Mexico. I also do doula work. I do walk through death processes with people. I table with end-of-life options New Mexico. I'm an information junkie. I'm on every talk I can hear about what's going on in the death and dying world. And like Neil said too, for me, dying really is a journey. It's like preparing for going to college, you know? We're gonna have a graduation here, and let's do some serious planning about it, give it some attention, and not be afraid of it. And I wonder sometimes if people aren't afraid of all this stuff that they have to do before, which is why they say that they don't want to talk about death. Maybe death is the easy part. It's all this other stuff that we take time to talk about. So that's really my passion, is to help to educate and empower people. And anything I can do, I've got a table out front, I've got cards, I'll be glad to talk to you. End-of-life options, I love them, and I've been with them from the beginning. So I've just been on this death education process for, well, actually, my niece told me, she said, you've been doing on this for 50 years, when I did a guardianship for my father, when I was in my 20s. And then I walked through some not very pleasant deaths with 2 family members, and I said, there's got to be a better way. And so I started educating myself and really digging into this so that I could learn it myself. And then I found that I could do this everything that I'd been learning, I could take it into this class. And so it's become one of my favorite things in the whole world, is to do this class. So that's my journey on the death thing.
My name is Nancy Abell. I'm a retired social worker. Okay, is that better? And I've lived in New Mexico now for about 30-some years in Santa Fe. And in 2012, my brother-in-law in Oregon used what they called their Death with Dignity Act. And my husband and I were with him. And that was my first opportunity to see what we call medical aid in dying in the flesh. And in 2012, there were only 2 states that had legalized medical aid in dying. So probably very few people in New Mexico would have had that opportunity. I knew about it intellectually, but of course seeing it on the ground was different and very impactful. And so I naively said to myself when I came back, gosh, we should have a law like that. How hard could that be? 9 years later, we got a law, 2021. And Neil asked me if I would tell some stories, I'm going to just tell one, about how we got from not having a law to having a law. And the law is called the Elizabeth Whitefield End-of-Life Options Act. It's named after a revered Albuquerque judge who had multiple forms of cancer and who advocated strongly in the legislature for this law. She died before we were able to achieve it, and we named it for her. And in my mind, the origin story of this law goes back maybe a quarter of a century. and it takes place in a law school classroom of Professor Rob Schwartz, a health law classroom. And there were two women in that classroom who were best friends, and still 25 years later are best friends. One of their names was Debbie Armstrong. Debbie was learning about health law, and she became an expert in health law. When she was in that class, she frequently brought her 17-year-old daughter with her. Her daughter had recently been diagnosed with cancer. Her daughter was 17. Sitting next to her in that classroom was her best friend, another woman, a 4'10" pistol. You may have heard of her. Her name is Michelle Lujan Grisham. Okay, so we have these two powerful women. Debbie became a representative in the legislature from Albuquerque. She was the chair of the Health and Human Resources Committee. Her buddy, best friend, she had some office in that building up on the 4th floor, I guess, the governor. And then the professor who inspired them became their colleague in crafting this law. He and Debbie crafted it together. And without him, ladies and gentlemen, we would not be sitting here and talking about medical aid in dying. I would like to acknowledge and ask him to please stand up. Professor Rob Schwartz, take your cane and stand up so that we can acknowledge you, because without you... Thank you. Rob was the muse. He had been studying this issue for 25 years. And when it came time for us to craft the law, when I say us, I was not involved in crafting it, what he did, we were the 10th state. He took the laws from all the other states and put them side by side and said, we don't want that. We'll take a little of this. We don't want that. We'll have some of that. And our law became the most progressive, the most accessible, the model for every other state in the country, both the people coming after us and then the people who came before us who said, oh God, let's try to modify our law to look more like New Mexico's law. And for those of us who cringe every time New Mexico is 49th or 50th on any list, we are number one when it comes to medical aid in dying. And I always talk about the lady from Colorado, whose name I can't remember, who wrote to me and said, every state wants to be New Mexico when they grow up. So thank you, Rob, for 25 years of work. Thank you, Debbie, who's not with us today, and thank you, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. So let's talk a little bit about what's in the law, because I don't want you to leave here not knowing what the law says or how you might access it, or some friend of yours or whoever. The law says that a terminally ill, decisionally capable adult who is able to self-administer the medication will be eligible to think about and apply or request a prescription from a doctor such as Lynn Nauman next to me, and she will talk about it in a clinical way, a script that the patient may then take or choose not to take. So let's unpack those three things. What do we mean when we say terminally ill? It's the same definition that hospice uses. That means that you have to have a terminal diagnosis, not 96 years old and all of your friends have died, or not if you're like me, if my husband dies, I'm going to say, I'm next, I don't want to live anymore. It has to be a terminal diagnosis with a prognosis of 6 months or less, okay? That's the first requirement. Second requirement is the patient has to be what is known legally and clinically as decisionally capable. You don't need to know what you had for breakfast this morning. You don't need to know who's the president. But you do need to understand what will happen if you take this script, that you will go to sleep, you will not wake up. You are doing it voluntarily. Nobody is coercing you. What about dementia? People ask me that question all the time. If you have dementia, can you access medical aid in dying? You have to be decisionally capable and within 6 months of dying, by some doctor's estimation, at the time you request. So if you have mild cognitive impairment, but you have a diagnosis, let's say, of cancer, which is the most common diagnosis, that's fine if you can make your own decision. If dementia is your only illness, and it is certainly a cause of death, by the time you reach a 6-month or less time to die, you will no longer be eligible, okay? Everybody with me on that? That's a little bit tricky, but if dementia is your primary diagnosis, you will not be eligible, because by the time you reach 6 months or less, you will no longer have decisional capacity. Okay, the third requirement is that you be able to self-administer the meds. Well, what does that mean? This is not a shot, it is not an IV, it is a compounded drug, and Lynn will go into detail, I'm sure, about it, but it is a powdered compound that's mixed with about 2 ounces of clear apple juice, and it is ingested. What does that mean, ingested? It means it goes through your digestive system, and for most of us, the way to get something through our digestive system, open our mouth and in it goes, right? Some people, as they approach the end of life, have lost their swallowing capacity, or they may not be able to keep anything down. For them, a rectal ingestion, an enema, the medicine can be placed in an enema and a catheter placed in the rectum, and the medicine is then again ingested into the digestive system. Or if you have a peg tube, which some patients do, they take their nourishment. I remember Elizabeth Whitefield coming to meetings, and we would all be sitting there and eating our lunch, and she would open up her peg tube and push her meds in. Okay, so the medicine goes into your digestive system, but what if you can't hold the cup? What do you think? So our law, here's one of the ways that Rob was a genius in expanding our law beyond what any other state had before us and what any other state has had after us. Our law says self-administration is a conscious, affirmative, voluntary act. Every other state says without assistance or independently. What does that mean? It means if you have ALS in another state and you can't hold the cup, you're out of luck. Or if you need to push a plunger for an enema or your feeding tube and you can't manage that with a neurodegenerative disease, you're out of luck. In our state, what we are looking for is intent, not strength. Okay, so if you are able to drink through a straw, which is the most common way that someone is going to ingest the meds, but you don't have the strength to hold the cup, someone can hold the cup for you. And many of our providers, Lynn being one of them, will tell you, I always hold the cup. I don't want the cup to fall. I don't want the dog to knock it over. I don't want anything to spill. I always hold the cup. The patient is only responsible for drinking through a straw. Likewise, if it's going to be a rectal administration, and the patient is supposed to push a plunger, if he has the ability to put his hand on the plunger, but not the strength to push it, someone can put his or her hand on the plunger. Ladies and gentlemen, that is different from every other state that has medical aid in dying. Thank you, Rob, again. Okay. This is huge. In other states, there have been challenges in court to try to, I would say weaken, to broaden their law to allow a patient to have some help in the actual process of ingestion, and it hasn't worked. In California, they tried that, and the judge said, no, go back to the legislature and try to get your law changed. I'm not going to do this for you. So we started with a floor that was different from any other state. Another thing that we are different from all the states that came before us, we have only a 48-hour waiting period from the time a patient asks for medical aid in dying until a script can be filled. When my brother-in-law died, it was 15 days from the time he made his first request, and then 15 days later, he had to make a second request, and then he had to find a second provider. Try that. Go out and try and find a doctor today who will give you an appointment within the next 3 months, maybe. Okay. So we have only one ask, and if the patient is enrolled in hospice, he needs only one attestation from one doctor. But the other thing is, every other state has said only a physician can be a provider for medical aid in dying. We were the first to say, gosh, we're in a rural state. There are lots of places where people don't have a doctor. They may have a nurse practitioner, they may have a PA, so we're going to ask for both of those things. And we became the first state to allow nurse practitioners. Now there are 2 other states that went back to their legislatures. This is not an easy thing to do, and got permission to add nurse practitioners. Nobody else has PAs allowed to do medical aid in dying. Lynn's professional partner, Leah Becker, is a PA. She's not here with us today, but I have to say she just completed her 50th at the bedside ingestion. It would not happen in any other state. Thank you. There are many things that we have in New Mexico that other states do not have. Some of them have tried to copy us, and we're delighted. Nobody has equaled us. And because of that, our uptake, meaning the number of people who have been able to access medical aid in dying in New Mexico, this should not be a surprise, is greater per capita than in any other state. Doesn't mean that other states don't have a larger absolute number. Of course, California has a larger absolute number, but their per capita number is way less than ours. As of this morning, 970 people have used medical aid in dying in New Mexico in just a little bit over 4 years. That is a number that no other state can begin to touch. I'm going to stop there because I think my 20 minutes are up, and then there may be questions, and I'm happy to answer them when it comes question time.
Nancy, there's just one other thing that always thrills me, and that's the universal right to know.
Universal right to know. Let's talk about that for a second, if I might. We are the only state that has in our law a provision, universal right to know, and again, that comes from Professor Schwartz. In Colorado, there was a clinician who worked at a Catholic hospital. Her patient asked her about medical aid in dying. She did not write a script. She only answered his questions. She was fired, okay? We thought, oh gosh, we don't want that to happen here. No one has to provide this service, no hospital, no hospice, no individual provider, but patients have a right to know that this law exists, and that's called universal right to know. And I hope that each one of you, when you leave here, if you each tell 3 other people, hey, I learned today that New Mexico has this law, I want you to know it, then 100 people will know it instead of 30 or 40 of you. So that is a bedrock that we have, and I take it sometimes for granted. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you so much. Next, we have an extraordinary individual, and I'm really privileged to introduce to you Dr. Lynn Nauman. One of the things that I think is so remarkable is our commitment to accessibility for this law. And rites of passage, which is the medical practice that Lynn and Leah actualize, has a very interesting strategy to make sure that no one is turned away. So thank you so much. Please.
So my name is Lynn Nauman, and I am delighted to be here. Thank you very much. And I'm in good company as well, and thank you all for coming. I'm a board-certified emergency physician and a board-certified hospice palliative physician. And somewhere along the line, I knew I couldn't do emergency medicine forever. And because my mom is a Unitarian Universalist minister, I was raised really with a lot of spirituality. So getting boarded in hospice palliative medicine really was quite natural, because in the ER we take care of end-stage disease. So here I am, and I met my partner, my professional partner, Leah Becker, at one of our rites of passage that I'm going to tell you about, at a medical aid and dying conference in Oregon, and it was maybe in 22, not sure when, but once upon a time, we met and got together and had this vision of being able to provide assisted dying to the state of New Mexico. And both of us have similar values of justice and equity and accessibility. And we were a good little pair, and we really did start a nonprofit with a lot of help from good folks who were moxie with nonprofits, as well as available to help us interpret all kinds of law. And I have to say, practicing in New Mexico under this law, I feel quite supported, I feel safe. I'm delighted that my partner is a PA, and she's smarter and more organized than I am. And I'm delighted that there's only a 48-hour waiting period, and that actually can be waived, and that's handy too. And unfortunately, we find that despite all of us who know about the law, there's a heck of a lot of people who don't know about the law. And they come about the information in a world of distress, and it's nice there's not an enormous waiting period. Because medical aid and dying has its law, which states we all need a terminal disease to access it. We recently, well, actually from the get-go, have been working with folks with dementia or with other devastating, debilitating chronic illnesses to be able to exercise the voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. And this has been quite a pursuit in my own education and my own tolerances and my own just growing personally and professionally. And we can talk more about that if that's necessary, if you're interested, right, the VSED. One thing that's become obvious is folks in my parents, fortunately my parents are still alive, it's a miracle. They are still alive, and they have their wits about them, but a lot of my friends' parents don't. And it's difficult to set up VSED when you've got dementia in its later stages. So it's important for for my generation and for those of us who are here who can proactively think about, gosh, how do we want to die, and how important are our advance directives. And they are so important. And I guess one thing I've learned is that they're modifiable. They themselves are a living document, so they change. Maybe you don't expect to break a hip, and you break a hip, and you do want to get it repaired, and then you want to go back to a do not resuscitate. It's all possible, but it's critical that we've thought about these things, and I think the information will be sort of reinforced that we provide at this panel. I also appreciate the fact that we work in teams. And when I say we, I don't just mean rites of passage, but that really truly through End of Life Options New Mexico, there are advocates throughout the states. I'm in touch with many of the physicians throughout the land of New Mexico and really throughout the United States, because it's kind of an up and coming practice of medicine. And that's a nice thing, because none of us really want to walk alone. And it's great to have the support when we do end-of-life care. And people say, oh, it's got to be so depressing. Well, it's really not so depressing. It's really an opportunity for each of us who works with death to examine our own lives and our own decisions. And it's truly a privilege. I think I'm about done with the mic. Until questions.
Is there a particular story that you can tell us about an experience that you had that underlines your saying this is not a dark and tragic event?
One,
Comes to mind,
well, Nancy got me thinking actually about a particular patient who's got MSA, multiple system atrophy, and it's a devastating disease, not unlike ALS. And this gentleman has been a palliative medicine patient of mine for years. And, you know, despite a broken hip and despite multiple aspiration pneumonias, he's now waiting on his 4th grandchild. And he's comfortable with a rectal ingestion. And, you know, the law, I'm not sure, I've learned that people's tolerances of disease and of compromise change as they get sicker. And he's a gentleman who continues to be willing to live despite what look like decreasing opportunities. And I guess it's exciting for me to be around a patient. I really get to know him, I get to know his family, I get to know his grandkids, because now they're traveling to him, he's not traveling to them. And it reminds me just how lucky we are. And I guess I have one more thing that's important to me as an emergency physician, a palliative physician. I also am very informed by a dear friend of mine who's a quadriplegic, and she and I grew up in the Bay Area together. I should say our 20s, when we were in our 20s. And she reminds me about quality of life, and that we can't presume, us able-bodied people, that because she's in a chair and she's got an indwelling Foley and soon she's going to have an ostomy, that her life isn't as worthy as my life. And because the way the law was written, and because I trust our lawmakers, it's important for me, because as our numbers increase throughout the state, it's critical that they increase for the right reasons. And we want to make sure that our people are cared for in our state of New Mexico, you know, medically, socially, spiritually, and that's my aim as well.
Lynn, just people might not be familiar with a palliative. And so just to make sure that everyone gets the difference between that and a curative approach.
Right. Palliative medicine is upriver, if you will, to hospice medicine. And what we do is we do concurrent care where you can take care of patients who are receiving curative care as well as comfort care. And a lot of what I do, of course, is symptom management, but it's coordination of care with other physicians or other social workers or PAs, what have you, to make sure that everybody has the patient's goals of care in mind. And it's critical because we lose sight, and the medical establishment, because it's so overwhelming and so dysfunctional, we forget about the patient. And I'm sure lots of us have experienced that. So what I can do is really help advocate for the patient.
Thank you. And now we get to hear from an extraordinary co-owner of a family-owned hospice that I've come to rely on as a client support volunteer for End of Life Options New Mexico. I might get a call. I just got a call from a woman who's a concert pianist in Brooklyn, New York. She can't really wait for the legislation to wind its way through to make sure that prescribers are available. And she's looking at, do I go to Vermont? Do I go to New Mexico? And I told her, I have this amazing hospice in New Mexico. So here is the co-owner of that amazing hospice, High Desert Hospice. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Katie. I'm the executive director of High Desert Hospice. My mom is the owner, and I've been so blessed for the last 10 years to be able to be a part of it and to work with her and our incredible staff taking care of people. It's been the highlight of my life outside of my children. I want to say a quick thank you to Nancy because she has really been my kind of mentor and my sounding board for a lot of things as medical aid in dying became part of our hospice program. I kind of got my start in hospice at a very early age. I was a volunteer. I started volunteering right after my 8th birthday. That's what happens when your mom works in healthcare. You just kind of tag along with her everywhere. And that was kind of the beginning of everything. Spent a lot of time in assisted livings, a lot of time with Alzheimer's patients, a lot of time, just being there to spend time with these people, their pets. I still remember the name of the dog that was at one of the facilities that we used to go to. And so it really kind of was interesting growing up in a space where, hospice was just a regular word in our house, and death was part of what, my mom did for work. And she spent the majority of her career as a marketer, and 10 years ago was approached to start her own hospice, one that wouldn't be corporate, one that would be family-owned, and kind of allow us the autonomy to walk with patients in a way that a lot of other places are not able to accommodate. So that's kind of the origin story of me. I've had the huge honor of caring for 2 of my grandparents on our hospice services. We've been in Albuquerque since we opened, but I want to say probably 8 years ago, we expanded to Las Cruces because that's where all of my grandparents live. That's where we're kind of from originally. In 2019, my grandfather passed away on our service from pancreatic cancer. And obviously, that was a time before medical aid in dying was even an option. But when we're talking about choices and the way that you're thinking about your journey and what you might want to consider and what you might want to say no thank you to. you know, I'm a huge advocate of quality of life, and I think that should be the number one thing on everybody's list when we're looking at, you know, the end of our life. I think that so many people are so afraid of hospice, or so afraid of palliative care, or so afraid of doing anything that is not curative. And I think that there's an importance of taking some time to reflect on how those decisions are going to make an impact on not only you, but the people around you. You would think, as somebody who's spent her whole life almost in hospice, that it would have been so seamless and everything would have been fine and we would have had all of our ducks in a row, but that is unfortunately not how we were kind of walking through that scenario. My grandpa was very proud. He was very stoic. One of the most influential people in my life. And he kept his diagnosis a secret until he said, I'm going to the Mayo Clinic for a second opinion. And me, you know, I know too much, right? Knowledge is incredible, but sometimes it's just, you know too much. And I was like, well, you know, nobody was going to tell him what to do or, you know, what not to do. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to come see you before you go. And I'm, you know, in the 3-hour drive down there, I'm like, how could I tell him that I don't think he should go? And it was not going to happen. He ended up receiving palliative chemotherapy at the Mayo Clinic and had to come home on an ambulance. And while I'm a realist, I know that we did not have very much time left. I think had he not gone through with the palliative chemotherapy, we may have had just a little bit more. And so when we're looking at choices, we're looking at the risks versus the reward, the quality versus quantity. And he went there in hopes of having more time and ended up coming home with less time and a much lower quality of life than what he went there with. And, you know, like I said, he was so incredibly proud and was not anybody that you were gonna have any sort of discussion with about end of life. And, you know, I had to be the one with my grandma saying it's time to sign the DNR. That's where the planning comes in. That's where thinking about these things come in, because you don't want to have those conversations when, you know, the end is around the corner, or when you're trying to spend time with your family. You don't want to have to face those things. And, you know, we got him comfortable. And I think that's the other thing, is that regardless of the way that you choose to exit this world, making sure that you have a team around you that understands your goals of care, understands, you know, are you going to want to treat a UTI? Do you want to treat pneumonia? What does that look like for you? If you get a hip fracture, are you going to want to go have surgery for that? What are the risks of being put under anesthesia? From a hospice standpoint, a lot of the times we end up getting referrals for patients who kind of have not had those discussions yet. And so we're getting them out of the hospital after all of these big events, right? Grandma had aspiration pneumonia. Grandpa fell and broke a hip. These are huge life-changing events that a lot of the times people don't recover from. And so having the discussions now while you're able to, and say, yeah, you know, if and when the time comes and I'm going to be put on hospice, I want somebody who's going to provide wound care. I want somebody who's going to treat my infections. It's really important to me that they have, you know, a Catholic priest available to me at the end of life. Those are all things that are important not only for family dynamics, right? Because you don't want to have any questions at the end of what would they want. You want to be able to say, yeah, we had these discussions and I know exactly what they want, and here's everything that we have in place so that we make sure that we honor that. A lot of the times we're trying to kind of rush and get all of those pieces put together. And, you know, like in the case of my grandpa, we only had him home for a week, and half of that week was spent kind of trying to organize everything. And so the importance of having these hard discussions, because you really don't ever know what's going to come. You know, you can be perfectly healthy and you can have a bad fall. You can be me, who finds out you have a rare genetic disease at 30. You know, life changes very quickly, and not being afraid of these things makes things so much easier. A lot of people are afraid of even talking about hospice. I think that my liaisons are the champions of the world because they go out there and have a lot of those difficult discussions. I have the privilege of doing all of the intakes for any patients that we get from End of Life Options New Mexico, or inquiries that come through our website about people who are interested in MAID. And they are my absolute favorite people to talk to because they are absolute. They've spent the time thinking about things. They understand where they're at, and they know where they want to go, and they know exactly how they want to get there. And a lot of the times it is because we want to be comfortable. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that if you do your research and you pick a hospice company that resonates with what your personal wishes are, you will be comfortable no matter what you choose. That is the hospice philosophy. It's our job to manage your symptoms, to make sure that you're comfortable, and to also be a support to your family. Hospice isn't just patient-focused, it is family-focused. And I will tell you, I didn't truly understand what that meant until I was on the receiving end of our services. And I thought, wow, this is what we get to provide to these families. And I will tell you, the sooner that you bring hospice into the picture and you make that decision, the better off everything is, because we have that much longer to make an impact, to have these discussions. Maybe there's family dynamics that need to get worked out before the end. Maybe you're struggling to pick a funeral home. You know, that is kind of a hot button with us, as nobody wants to talk about the funeral home until after their loved one has passed away. And that is, I think, in my opinion, the worst time to do it, because then you're pressured to make this decision. And I think that death, dying, end of life is such a personal journey. And that's what I tell everybody who's on our service is, we're just along for the ride, and we're here to make it as comfortable as possible. And so I think, taking those steps beforehand to make the journey as smooth as possible is really the best case scenario. End of life, you spend a lot of time on, but at the same time, it can happen very quickly. And, you labor into this world, right? There's all this preparation that goes into labor and delivery and preparing for your baby and making sure you have everything on your registry and you have every possible thing that you could need. The end of life, your labor out of the world, deserves that same amount of preparation and appreciation, because it's not just about comfort, it's about the legacy that you're leaving behind, the last moments that you're going to spend with your family, and really, setting a wonderful example of having these kinds of conversations. My mom she's got a wicked sense of humor about her sometimes, but I can tell you I've known what her end of life plans are since probably I was age 12. So, it's just about kind of taking the stigma away, because it's going to happen to us all eventually. Every one of us is going to leave the planet. We're not all going to be here forever. And I think having those discussions allows for you to find the people in the community that best align with what your wishes are, and the things that are important to you, and finding the right group to be around you in this time of your life is just imperative. So I really encourage you guys to think about it, to make sure that your family is thinking about it, to facilitate those discussions. What might seem odd, you know, I mean, I ended up being responsible for a lot of things with my grandpa, and so did my brother. And, you know, I didn't really have a whole lot of things to go off of because he was kind of closed off in that department. So recognizing that it may not be your kids, but it might be your grandkids or your siblings. It could end up being, you know, we have a patient on our service right now, and, you know, her mother is 93 and she's her daughter's power of attorney. And the mom is still, she's doing great, but she is still in a caregiver capacity for her daughter. So you just never know what the roles are going to be, and making sure that you have an open dialogue for everything, I think, is super important. So if you take nothing else away from today, I hope it's that.
Let's give a big round of applause to my hero, I did have a question whispered into my ear from the virtual space of Zoomland, and thank you all for being here and witnessing this. And the question, I think, really goes to you. It's a woman who asks, what about non-residents of New Mexico and MAID?
That seems to be kind of our forte. We've been very blessed to take care of many people from outside of the state of New Mexico. I kind of learned that that was an option from Nancy. My uncle was in Arizona and had ALS and was considering medical aid in dying. And I remember I called Nancy and I was like, is this even an option? What does this look like? And she basically kind of schooled me on the fact that the bill was written so beautifully that there's not any specific residency requirements for the state of New Mexico. It says that you must be a resident of New Mexico, and it's at the provider's discretion to determine what that is. So basically, for patients who are outside of the state of New Mexico, I provide them with a respite facility for them to reside in until which time they are ready to have their ingestion. We cover 5 days of that respite stay, but people do it all different ways. We have some people who prefer the Airbnb route, which I've become quite fond of. They kind of have their family time in that Airbnb, and then the day that they're ready to have their ingestion, we move them over to our respite facility, and that's where the ingestion takes place. Otherwise, they come, you know, especially for some of our folks come, you know, via ambulance transport, non-emergent transport, so they do need that respite stay because they do require kind of a higher level of care. So they, you know, reside at that respite stay until they have chosen their ingestion date. And we kind of do a lot of the pre-planning before they get here, so we get them set up with their funeral home and all of that information. They meet all of my staff when they get here, and they receive daily visits from my hospice team until they have their ingestion. And we have our provider bedside and a nurse, and then we kind of walk them through that process.
Thank you so much for providing that service to our neighbors. I know personally just from my work that folks in Texas and Arizona are really grateful to you. Thank you. I did say, because I know these are intimate questions, and I know for a lot of people, it's not your habit to pose an intimate question that's in your heart. in a public presentation. But I do want to invite you to contact these people as well, and that's why I've sent around. I hope everyone got cards for rites of passage. If you haven't, I don't know where, I think this first row got lost. I'll look for that and make sure you get it. But again, it's an invitation, so get to know these folks. They might be around. You can stop them on their way out. They might be seated at a table. But if you have a question, because we are going to have at the end a reprise of the mother of us all, Gail Rubin's TED Talk, and some people paid $150 to hear this, and you guys are not going to have to do that. So raise your hand. You can whisper it or just I hand it to you.
I'm not shy, thank you. I just wanted, I'm a new volunteer with End of Life Options New Mexico, and the services, the free services that are provided by the organization are stunning. And I wanted to dovetail off something Dr. Nauman was talking about. Since becoming a volunteer, I found that there's actually an advanced healthcare directive specifically for dementia. And while it's been pointed out that choosing medical aid and dying at some point is no longer an option, in this dementia advanced healthcare directive, there's basically a way to choose VSED, which is not to have food or hydration offered to you. And that was a stunning choice that, that I came across and that I'm glad is available. Thank you.
Just be brave. There we go. I'll just flip around.
It's more of two comments and maybe a question to the group, the panel. The law, unless they've changed it, doesn't specify a 6-month terminal. The law says terminal illness. As far as I know, not 6 months. And so what I found is that the medical establishment has limited us to 6 months. So if a person with cancer knows they're going to die in a year, it's really difficult to get a prescription until they wait for, if we as a group have decided that it's 6 months, even though, has the law changed is one question. The second one is, also the law doesn't state that a doctor actually has to be present, but all the doctors that I know of and the PAs sort of insist that they're present after they've written the prescription because they feel really responsible because you now have this dose, right, that can take a life. And so the doctor feels like they have to be there even though, what does the sort of panel feel about those two statements that I just made?
I'd like to respond to the first one about changing the law to a year. Was that your question or your comment? Yes, the law says that the patient has to be determined to have 6 months or less to live. We used that benchmark. Please understand, passing a law is a political process. It's not a medical process. It's not even a legal process, it's a political process. So you're talking to non-physicians primarily, legislators from all over the state. Most of them understand or aware of, in order to be a patient in hospice, you have to have 6 months or less. That's a pretty standard number that people understand, even if they're not physicians. We tried in our first go-round in 2017 to say, well, if a patient was expected to die in the foreseeable future, that didn't get anywhere. Legislators said, well, what the hell is the foreseeable future? We were thinking about particularly patients with neurodegenerative diseases, and it was clear that we could lose the whole ship on that. And so we went back to something that they understood, which was 6 months. So really, you're talking about a political process. I don't know any law in any state in the US that does not say 6 months or less. The adjustment that we made, particularly for neurodegenerative diseases, was not a time adjustment, but it was the being able to have someone help you with a cup or with the plunger, so that you didn't feel like you had to do this a year ahead of time. But we would not have a law if we had said just foreseeable future, or even a year. In Australia, they have 6 months for everybody except neurodegenerative. They have 12-month. We were not, and their law came after ours. We were not able to achieve that. Remind me what the second part of, about the doctors being present. I'm going to let Lynn speak for this, but the law does not dictate in any way medical practice. So if a physician or PA or nurse practitioner chooses to be at the bedside, that's a clinical and a value-based decision that that clinician makes. I cannot tell you how proud I am of our clinicians in New Mexico, because you are right, there is nothing in the law that compels them or requires them to be there. They do that out of their own conscience and their own good practice. It is not the case in almost every other state in the country that has medical aid in dying. In most of those places, patients ask the clinician for a script, they get a script, it's in their home, they may or may not take it, and the clinician is nowhere to be found. Lynn, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I am glad that we choose to be with our patients. It is a value-based decision. You're absolutely right. And basically, because we are supervising, if you will, we are orchestrating, it means that the family and the dear friends don't have to feel responsible for giving their loved one a lethal cocktail. And that's a really big deal, especially post when we have bereavement and grief. So it's a beautiful thing. And I have a comadre in Oregon who thinks, well, geez, you know, what's the big deal? We don't have to have providers in our state. And it's true, it's not a necessity, but I do believe it's a kindness. And because our state has encouraged people to do it that way, I think it's a good thing.
Piggyback off of that. Yeah, so just to add to that, you know, I view it as a very sacred thing. We're being allowed into a very intimate part of somebody's life. And I think taking that responsibility away from the family is number one important. Because while the patient may want this, there may be family members who are still kind of uneasy about it. And to put that level of responsibility on them of, hey, this is your responsibility, and also you have to responsibly clean up for, you know, the glass and all of the waste materials that are left over afterwards. I think it's just too much pressure to put on anybody. And I mean, just to add on for the terminal diagnosis thing, that is a Medicare guideline. I can't admit anybody to my hospice service that doesn't have a 6-month or less life expectancy. So that's where it's, you know, kind of, I think, very cut and dry for a lot of people. Yes, this person could go on hospice, so yes, they could have access to this service.
Thank you. I've got one question here, and then I'll get to you.
First, thank you, panel, for all that you do and the information. Gail encouraged me to share this information. It's germane to some of the issues that are being addressed right now. 3 years ago, my family, and I was the point person, took our patriarch to Dignitas in Switzerland. And since then, my son and I have set up a company called Axios Consulting to help people who are beyond that 6-month terminal diagnosis, especially people with Alzheimer's, which is what my father had, Parkinson's, and so on. So we, to our knowledge, are the only ones in North America or in the English-speaking world that are helping people get educated about how to use the system in Switzerland, especially Dignitas. And both my son and I are fluent in German, and we will be accompanying the people there to Switzerland who decide to use that, who do not fit into the MAID guidelines of that 6 months. I sure hope it changes in America. I don't think it will anytime soon. Swiss law allows a lot more flexibility there. And my name is Brian Rigg. Thank you.
You changed your mind?
Oh, no, I didn't change my mind. It's not really a question. It's just a point of clarification, only because I'm an attorney. So I looked up HB 46, and I think that the confusion comes is that just talking about 6 months is not in the body of the act, but it's in the definition of terminal illness. So terminal illness is defined as, in a medical judgment, will result in death in 6 months. So when they say the term terminal illness in the body of the act or anywhere, it relies on that definition. That's all.
Thank you so much for what you do. Over there.
Could someone explain the process of voluntary stopping eating and drinking, like what that would look like, how long something like that happens?
Sure. So a patient makes a decision with a decisional mind, with capacity, as we say, and is generally very well supported, because it's a process that can take as many as 14 days. Generally, it takes probably 6 to 21 days for somebody who really, truly stops drinking water and stops taking in food. And the drinking of water is the hardest part because one gets thirsty. So our organization, which operates on a sliding scale, we interview the patient, the family, we encourage 24-hour caregivers, which also cost money, but there are ways to work with that as well. We make sure the process is well understood. There's 3 phases. The first phase is filled with fatigue and weakness and maybe a little bit of confusion. And then as dehydration sets in, patients can get more agitated and confused and unsteady on their feet and more apt to stay in bed and sleep more. And then the third stage is organ failure and unconsciousness. So we try to talk patients through that ahead of time so they understand really what the process looks like. And as an MD, I can prescribe medicine, and I can be in relationship with hospices who are willing to take on the patient for a short period of time. And there's also pre-enrollment with hospice to make sure they have the opportunity, if they want, to get to know the patient. Does that answer your questions?
I'll just come up. Can I, one here first?
Yeah, quick question about the medical aid in dying. What is the 48-hour thing? I missed that.
Says, thank you, 48, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize, I don't have the mic. 48 hours from the time the script is written until it can be filled. That's the only waiting period at all, and that waiting period can be waived. So if Lynn has a patient and she thinks the patient is going to die within 48 hours, she can say to the pharmacist, please fill this now, someone will be by to pick it up in 2 hours or whatever. So basically we have no waiting period, although the law says 48 hours, but it can be waived. It's the most accessible in the country. Okay?
Just on the VSED, one thing that End of Life Options New Mexico client support volunteers have been hearing about is what they call VSED to MAID. And so I understand it was embedded in there, but I wanted to underline it and see if you can address that. That for some people who are elderly, who voluntarily stop eating and drinking, even though they don't have a terminal diagnosis, pretty quickly they are eligible for hospice. And once they're eligible for hospice, they're eligible for medical aid in dying. Do I have that wrong?
Sure. It's true that there is this process of VSED to MAID. It's also true that I haven't been a part of it. And it's possible for sure, but it's also a little bit risky because as somebody stops eating and drinking, they really can get confused, they can develop delirium, they can become combative, and things can unravel quickly. So it's not a given, but it's also not impossible. And so what I say to my patients is, we will keep you comfortable. We will make it so that it's not a miserable process. It really doesn't have to be.
Thank you. So that's around decisional capacity.
Yeah,
you might, after voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, lose that capacity and not qualify for the law.
I'd like to add that there are 2 evaluations, and in states where no clinician is at the bedside on the day of ingestion, they just totally missed this second evaluation. But a clinician needs to evaluate decisional capacity when the patient asks for medical aid in dying. Are you decisionally capable of even making that request? And then again, on the day of ingestion, because as people approach death in a natural way, they may have brain metastases from cancer that they will lose their decisional capacity. They just may become delirious or whatever. And so the clinician at the bedside, in my opinion, is essential. There's nothing in the law that mandates it to do, in fact, a second eval. Is this person still decisionally capable, whether it's a VSED patient or a patient with just straight MAID?
Thank you. I believe we have a person.
Yeah, since this conference is called Before I Die, I would also like to know if you offer education on VSED. Like, for example, coming from Germany, I went to a workshop, at a 4-day residential workshop, where we talked all about VSED. So this was taught by a psychiatrist who specializes in gerontology in Berlin, outside of Berlin, at a retreat center. So when does this time start before I die? I could think about this already when I'm 30, when I'm 20. How do I want to die? And to prepare myself so that I know from the get-go how VSED would look like, not for me, but also for family members, friends, and so on. So is there anything like this here in New Mexico where you offer preparation, consciously thinking about, experiencing, and also actually seeing all the materials I need for VSED? That's one question regarding VSED. The other question is, are there workshops held here about last aid, not only first aid? 1-day workshops in last aid, where you see already everything that I need, practically too, yeah? Spiritually, on all levels. So I wonder if that is happening here or not. I just participated, 2 years ago in this VSED thing in Germany, and the last aid one in Berlin in a year ago or whatever.
So give me your name.
Lava.
I'll get your name, and so you might be formative in our Create Sounds
Yeah, I would love to.
We want to know next steps. And you see, it does take a whole community. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Because I think we do need last aid as somebody who works tightly with EMS and first aid responders. I love it. And I know, for example, November 9th in Santa Fe, we're having a little educational forum. And I also know, it occurred to me last night with a friend who's also a colleague that I'm going to ask the Unitarian Church to do some regular discussions, demos, etc., for VSED, because I think it's so important that we know it's a legal, viable, fairly wonderful option. So thank you.
We have another question.
Yes, thank you all very much. I'm wondering about one of your last comments in regards to the second time a physician would check in with a person that was dying and had the prescription. What if the cancer or whatever has them really confused and they're not able to answer? Or I may have misunderstood that.
Okay, well, no, it's true. This is our rites of passage card, and there's a window on it. And you speak of something very important, which is a window that we don't want closing. And one has to have decisional capacity to go through with the process. And right before the medication is consumed or given to be consumed, etc., we need to make sure the patient is decisional. And if they're on hospice, they likely they do have a terminal diagnosis, and then it's imperative that all of the folks involved in the care are tracking decisional capacity, because it's true that brain tumors get bigger, they bleed, they swell, and things change quickly. So we have to really monitor the window.
To piggyback off of that, another thing to consider when we're looking at the window, which I'm so grateful that Lynn brought that up, because that is a huge thing with medical aid in dying, is that everybody does have a window. And when we're looking at that in respect to pain management and making sure that you're able to keep your pain under control, as things are progressing, cancer patients specifically tend to have significant increases in pain. So not only from a disease process standpoint do we want to make sure that on the day of, for our program, we obviously will schedule the ingestion. My provider and my nurse are bedside for everyone, but we don't actually sign the consent paperwork until right before the ingestion, because we want to make for certain, yes, this is what they want, they're capable of having the discussion, we can get all of the paperwork we need taken care of. And in some cases, you know, we even have to kind of wean off the pain medication, because it may not be an issue of disease progression that's affecting their capacity. It very well could be that maybe they're narcotic naive and aren't used to the volume of pain meds that they're requiring. So then they have to kind of make that decision of, yes, I'm okay being in maybe a little bit more pain than I would prefer to be in, knowing that this is going to make sure that I'm on point for tomorrow.
Thank you very much for all that you do. This question is for Dr. Nauman and Katelynn. You had mentioned that out-of-state individuals can come and participate in MAID. But then you said that the prescription is a 48-hour prescription. So how does that work? If they contact the hospice center, do you help facilitate a doctor's appointment? Because I can't imagine that someone from New York coming has a physician here who could actually assess them and then prescribe.
So kind of what our process is that we would request all of their medical records before they come and review them and make sure that documentation supports that they do have a terminal diagnosis. And then once they, and you know, we kind of go through pretty good pre-screening. And then once they are here, then we kind of assess all over again. And we don't, because our providers that work for High Desert Hospice make sure that they are, like, they do their own prescriptions. There's not any outside appointments that need to be made. It's all made by my medical director, my nurse practitioner. So we assess them when they arrive and then move forward with the prescription from them. And then I'll let Lynn kind of walk through how she does things.
I might get a call from a patient in Texas or in Arizona who is interested, and I do a similar process. I make sure indeed they're terminal, and this is a time when we've used Scott's House, which is our residential sort of social dying home in Santa Fe, which is wonderful, which allows patients to arrive there. There are all kinds of scenarios that have unfolded because we're sort of willing to accommodate if indeed it's appropriate. And I might call End of Life Options New Mexico. It depends, but people, because End of Life Options New Mexico is such a hub and they really know who's out there doing what, things get facilitated and it's not complicated, fortunately.
I'd like to add something that I didn't mention in my remarks, kind of going off of what our High Desert Hospice expert is telling us. We have more than a dozen hospices in New Mexico, from Farmington to Socorro, that provide this service as medical aid in dying. As part of their service, there is no charge to the patient. It is the medical director, or in the case of High Desert, their nurse practitioner, who is the prescriber. So the patient does not have to have an outside prescriber. I will tell you that most of the states that have medical aid in dying, including Oregon, have 0 hospices that provide that service. We take it for granted that we have a High Desert Hospice that says, of course, come, we'll take care of you soup to nuts. And other hospices, if you don't happen to be in Albuquerque, if you are in Taos, or you are in Santa Fe, or wherever. And that's, I can't tell you why our hospices have stepped up, but they have. And we are very fortunate that if you are enrolled in one of those hospices, you don't need an outside provider or prescriber. It's all part of the service.
Thank you so much again for all of you who came. There's a difference between attention and intention. What we're nourishing here is you're beginning to sort through your own values. Our German friend was clear about how this can begin when you're 20. What are your values? You're creating a dying process that's worthy of the life that you've lived, that presents an example and a legacy for those around you. Now we have, as I advertised, an extraordinary moment to honor the founder of this gathering, who offered this TED Talk, and the theme for that TEDx was curiosity.
I have a
mic.
I have to gesture. If you're younger than age 70, you've probably said, "If I die." Newsflash, the mortality rate is holding steady at 100%. It's not if, but when. And aren't you curious about death, that universal experience that waits for all of us? I think a good death is a pain-free transition like going to sleep. My dad used to quote to me the last line of the poem Thanatopsis. "Approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him, and lies down to pleasant dreams. As a pioneering death educator, that's death, not death, and as a daughter, I have had two very different experiences with medical aid in dying. Here in New Mexico, we have the opportunity to say not only when, but how with medical aid in dying. Now, some call this assisted suicide, others death with dignity. It's currently legal in New Mexico, 11 other states, and the District of Columbia. And when New Mexico's legislation became law in June of 2021, other states have used our legislation as a model for their medical aid in dying legislation. When I had, over the past 24 months, 7 deaths in my family, 8 if you count my cat. Curiosity did not kill this cat. 9-year-old Ilsa developed feline infectious peritonitis, a fatal disease. The vet gently ended her suffering with injected medications. We offer our pets a good death. Why not our people? In New Mexico, to qualify for medical aid in dying, you must be at least 18 years of age or older, mentally able to understand and make that request, physically able to ingest the medication yourself, present in the state of New Mexico, but you don't have to prove residency, and have a terminal condition with a 6-month prognosis, which often means hospice is involved. Life itself is a sexually transmitted terminal condition. We just don't know our expiration date, and that terrifies us. But it's also really weird to know the exact date someone is going to die. For many people, hospice is a good choice for a good death. My husband, my father, and my mother all died as peacefully and painlessly as possible on inpatient hospice care. Then my elderly in-laws, Al and Myra, wanted medical aid in dying. They went on home hospice, hoping to die together. It was Al's idea. Al was Myra's second husband, a large and in charge kind of guy. But while petite, frail Myra qualified, Al was deemed too healthy. Well, if we can't go together, we're not going to do it. He revoked hospice, and 6 months later, guess what? Al was actively dying and not mentally present to request made or even sign the paperwork. I got them back on home hospice and moved in to care for them in their final days. Al spent hours in terminal agitation, thrashing around on his king-size bed. He finally expired at 3 a.m. 6 days later, Myra died peacefully using medical aid in dying in the afternoon. We had a gathering in the living room with roses and candles, readings, and singing. The hospice nurse mixed the medications in the kitchen. 5 potent drugs relaxed the patient into unconsciousness, easing pain, slowing the breathing, and stopping the heart. It's a powder that's mixed with 2 to 4 ounces of apple juice and usually drunk through a straw. It tastes like horseradish, so patients are offered sorbet to cool that burning sensation. Myra had a really strong reaction to the burning taste, and with a little more sorbet, she drank it all down, Within 3 minutes, she was asleep on her lounge chair, and within the hour, after a few deep breaths, she gently died. Yet even when someone qualifies for medical aid in dying, the window of opportunity to use it can close very fast. This happened to my friend Michael in California. For 4 years, Michael fought glioblastoma, an aggressive form of brain cancer. Most people who get this die in 12 to 18 months. With increasing confusion, headaches, hospitalizations, he called me and asked me to come to LA to help him access medical aid in dying. He was discharged home to his apartment on hospice care. The hospice doctor agreed with his wish for MAID. A second doctor interviewed him and wrote the prescription. The timing was carefully scheduled so that Michael could receive a promotion in the military on Friday. But early Thursday morning, Michael had an anxiety attack and a mental meltdown that put him back in the hospital for a day. He had a second meltdown during his promotion. Beforehand, his comrades took him out for a short walk. I could see him gesturing up at me on the second floor walkway. An officer came up the stairs. Listen, can we pump the brakes on this? He says you're here to kill him. No, the medical aid in dying choice is totally up to Michael. The last time our eyes met, Michael glared at me. Brain cancer had destroyed his ability to think rationally. He was 2 days from getting the good death he said he wanted. He spent 45 more days hospitalized, pleading to go home. He eventually stopped eating and drinking, a perfectly natural way to die, perfectly legal for everyone, everywhere. His memorial service was held on September 27th, the day I gave this TEDx talk. Medical aid in dying is a choice that the patient makes and an action they take. It's not something someone does to you. Some patients get the medication and don't use it. It gives them a sense of control and choice. You'd give your pet a good death. People also deserve a good death. Be curious, be brave. Approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams.